20th Century Geek is part of Britpod Scene, a network of uniquely British podcasts that's always growing. Check out BritpodScene.com or follow Britpod Scene on Twitter to find out more.
I'm Scott Weatherly. Welcome to 20th Century Geek. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of 20th Century Geek. Hopefully after last week you enjoyed the interview with Dave Moody. It was a cracker. I really enjoyed interviewing him. Really nice guy. I've been in contact with him since, and we've done the competition. We've had the winner. It's been announced on Twitter, and hopefully that's been sent out now. So congrats to Brendan who won that. Hopefully we'll be receiving that signed Dave Moody book soon. Today we've got another giveaway following the interview later. So today I'm interviewing Peter McLean, author of the Drake series of books, starting with Drake and followed by, let me just check, Dominion. I've read Dominion. I bought a copy of Drake and I will get into it, but I have to say it was a cracking book. Really enjoyed it. And we'll get into it in the interview. But following the interview, there will be a competition question to win a signed copy of the first book from the series, Drake. So I'll tell you right now, if you like Constantine or the Dresden Files, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, or anything like that along those lines, you will really, really like the Drake series. There's a darker element to it. It's a bit more Constantine than Dresden, but they're really, really good. Really good. Really recommend them. But they do fit into this element of horror that I think is worth talking about. We talked, with Dave Moody the other week about everything from zombies and the apocalypse and some of the original literature and authors and writers that have sprinkled throughout the 20th century and contributed great deals. And obviously last week I also focused on the legacy of the great icon H.P. Lovecraft. I've been reading quite a lot of his work actually as well, which is great. And the more and more I read, the more and more I see his legacy being played out in so many other authors. But the one thing that H.P. Lovecraft really does hone in on is the unseen horror. The horror underneath the surface. So many times the characters are just sort of like regular people who are exposed or thrown into a horrific event, or gain sight of some horrific monster in some of the most normal circumstances. And that's the key to a lot of this. Especially with things like, again, going to Drake and the Dresden Files and those sorts of things, it's the horror that exists just under that surface of normality. And I think that's where we really find terror. As a pop culture, I think it's prevalent throughout. I mean, there's great fantasy horror and there's masses of sort of like really extravagant horror. Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, those sorts of things, those horror, that sort of like jump scare kind of slasher horror is very blatant. I love it, don't get me wrong. I'm a massive fan, especially of Freddy Krueger and the first couple of Halloween films. But all of it is very in your face. It's all about the horror. It's all about the slasher killer, and more about the kills than the victims, really, as the series go on. And then the same about the zombies. Zombies can be, yes, they are used as a satire in a number of cases, but they are still very much the horror. The horror is physical. It's that sort of, my God, look at this person's rotting face trying to eat me kind of deal. And, it goes on and on about these sort of like, in-your-face horrors, which I'm not going to deny I do love. They're great. But there's something that really, really works for me in sort of like urban fantasy and urban horror. And this idea of something horrific and terrifying living, existing for hundreds of years or whatever, just underneath the surface. You can look at all kinds of great examples of this from all over pop culture, from the poppiest of pop culture, for example Buffy the Vampire Slayer, taking the idea, as Joss Whedon did, of the blonde victim, cheerleader victim that's the usual case, and turning her into the warrior heroine. But the fact that these vampires, and I'm not talking crappy Twilight sparkly vampires, I'm talking proper vampires, that they exist unseen, unknown, as society. You go to bed at night, you took your kids in, you go to bed, you flick off your light, you think you're safe, but just outside that window is a craggly faced vampire willing to, wanting to get in and suck your blood. That thing of not knowing what's in the dark, what's out there, really I find fascinating in horror. Buffy's a great example. I think there's more though. The X-Files tapped on this quite a lot. That sort of thing of what exists in small town America was their thing. Whether it be the twisted, incestuous families of like Home, or the biological entities that existed in episodes like Ice or Firewalker. But the good one, the really good one, is Eugene Toombs. Eugene Toombs existing solely to eat every 30 years, coming out to take a bite. Same with It, Pennywise the clown, or the demon that exists inside Derry, coming out every 30 years to take a bite out of the populace. Those things that exist under the normalcy of humanity, the suburban, is what I really like, and Lovecraft really tapped into that. I'm repeating myself really, but it's more a case of when you add in people like John Constantine, and it's not so, what's the word I'm looking for, cataclysmic. It's not the end of the world all the time. It's just something small, one person in danger, because something is stalking them, something that we do not see. That's the real scares for me. I think that's fantastic. So I've been rambling just to fill some time. I was intending to do a one-man overview thing again. I was thinking of John Constantine. Time got away from me, unfortunately, but we still have the interview, a great interview. So to stop me from rambling, we will hand over to the interview. But this is a big chance really, because we're going to be doing more horror this year, later in the year. For September, we're going to be doing a couple of horror films. I've mentioned them before. Mike is going to be joining me again to talk about the films American Werewolf in London and Return of the Living Dead. Two crackers. So please, if you've got any favourite horrors, any horror literature, really horror books, I really, want to hammer home that this has been like Literature Month. This has been all about the books. And so if you've got a favourite books of, ones that really make you scared, whether when you were a kid or when you're now, just, get in contact, let me know, tweet about it. Find me on Twitter at 20th Century Geek. Email me at 20th Century Geek at gmail.com. But yeah, I want to know, what books make you scared? A lot of people talk about the usual Stephen King, James Herbert, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, who's come up a few times, good ones. But what other unusual ones? Peter Straub's Ghost Story, that's a cracker, that's a really good one. I highly recommend that. Anyway, I will bring this to a close. So I'm now going to hand you over to me, talking to Peter McLean about many things, including how he became a writer. So I'll catch up with you guys later. Okay, so we'll get stuck in, because obviously it's a Thursday evening, so I don't want to waste up too much of your time. So let's start with the obvious question, but let's start with your origin. How did you become a writer?
Oh boy, it's one of those things I've kind of always done. I think I've been writing bits and pieces since I was in high school, but I think I was probably around 40 by the time I started actually really taking it seriously. I wrote a couple of books, had a bit of agent interest, and it never really went anywhere. I came up with Drake, and I actually entered that in the Angry Robot open submissions period.
Angry Robot as in to the publisher then?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So they normally only take agency submissions, but every sort of 18 months to 2 years, they'll do a short open submissions window where anybody can send them finished work.
Yeah.
That was... I'm trying to think. Well, yeah, that must have been the 2014 window, I think.
Mm.
And they liked Drake and signed me for the first book. So that eventually came out January 16. It was a very long process, but it came out at the start of last year. The second book, Dominion, came out November last year, and Damnation just dropped at the start of May this year.
So it was sort of you chanced your arm, and it's definitely worked out for you then.
Absolutely. I mean, they had the year I was in Open Door. I think there was 680 or something people going through it, and as far as I know, I was the only one they signed. So
wow,
it's kind of wing and a prayer odds, but it can be done. I know a couple of other writers that got published through Publisher Open Door submissions as well.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things like the lottery, isn't it? You've got to be in it to win it. So if you don't try, you don't...
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a literary agent now, but I mean, if you're submitting to agents, I don't know that your odds are a lot better, to be honest.
Yes, yeah.
I get an enormous number of submissions from authors all around the world, and there's only so many hours in the day, only so many clients they can take on, and books they think they can sell.
Well, that's it. Yeah, because like I say, the market's only so big, isn't it?
Absolutely. So
you sort of you say you came into Drake, or you came up with Drake relatively recently, but what were you writing then before? What sort of has it always been this in the horror thriller kind of area, or has it always been...
Mostly? Well, I started out writing sort of science fiction. When I was kind of 15, 16 years old, is very thinly disguised Star Wars fan fiction. Luckily, none of that still survives because I doubt it was very very readable in all honesty. But writing is one of those things that you have to learn by doing.
Yes.
I think the more words you write, the more readable it will eventually get. So while you're learning the trade, it almost doesn't matter what you write. You just write whatever you fancy. I mean, I've written horror, I've written urban fantasy, swords and horses fantasy, bad science fiction. Science fiction is really not my thing, but I'll say it's what I started with. I did used to write a lot of horror stuff in the 90s. That's mainly what I was reading at the time, I guess. So you get a lot of bleed over from what you're reading into what you're writing. Yeah,
those are the influences. What kind of horror? So what was your horror influences in the 90s?
Oh, well, it probably started before that. I mean, I was reading horror when I was early in high school.
Yeah.
I started out, the good old 80s British horror classics, James Herbert, Sean Hudson, Guy Smith, all that.
Yes.
Mutant giant thing eats people and gets chased by the hero who's having sex with the heroine by about page 100, and at the end they kill nearly all of them until they come back in the sequel.
I have to admit, because I've been talking to quite a few people like their sort of, their origin story, as it were, sort of whether it be for comics or film or for horror. And whenever I speak to like the British, the British guys or the British people, there always seems to be a theme. There's like James Herbert comes up a lot. 2000 AD.
Yes, I was a big 2000 AD fan. I used to love that.
Yeah, I just spoke to John Tomlinson recently, who created Armored Gideon in the 90s, and it's almost like a gateway drug, isn't it? Really, for British fans.
Oh, I think so. I mean, 2000 AD, you sort of think of Judge Dredd and Strom's Dog and that, but there was some dark stuff in that.
Oh, yeah.
My favourite was Nemesis the Warlock. I mean, that was just so nuts.
Yeah, the proper twisted.
Oh, well, it was a masterclass in getting shit past the censors.
Yes.
I've read interviews with Kevin O'Neill, who obviously very famously did all the art for that, and a lot of ABC Warriors. And he was complaining in the interview about the amount of stuff he used to get made to white out. And I just think, I want to see the original drawings, dude.
Yeah.
If this is the stuff you weren't allowed to print. You really were absolutely you see there was a lot of Geiger influence in Kevin O'Neill's art, I think. A very, very bioorganic, horrible, crawling things sort of look to everything in Terminus. And that really appealed to me. It still does. Love his stuff.
I mean, yeah, Kevin O'Neill's one of those artists. I think his artwork ages really well because it's so stylistic. It ages really well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the other stuff I used to love in 2000 AD with the Bill Savage series, was that called Invasion? And I mean, that was great in the late 70s because it was set in the far future of 1999, and obviously that doesn't age well, does it? And Robo Hunter as well I think that was supposed to be set about nowish, and it just doesn't work, does it? But
no,
it's so out there.
It was such, and that's it. I think that's it's one of the reasons I started doing this podcast was just to go back and find out about, like, you know, why did people start getting into these things and what things have inspired things. So let's say James Herbert, your 2008 Ds. Anything else then really that stands out to you as your influences?
Oh, early Stephen King as well.
Yes,
definitely. So I mean, I think the first King I read was Christine, I think, and Salem's Lot, The Shining, Carrie. I mean, I had shelves of this stuff back in the day. Unfortunately, most of it's gone in various house moves, but I had all the James Herberts at one point, up till about 1995, and everything he'd written. And, nearly all of Stephen King. I used to love Guy Smith's Crabs books as well. Terrible though they were hugely entertaining at the time.
I have to admit, I think I've only read one Guy Smith book. Is it with The Sucking Pit?
Yeah.
One of his first ones. They're very pulpy.
They are. I mean, he used to write one a fortnight at one point. He thought he was a Welsh farmer who just did it in the evenings for fun, and got them published, you know. And one's probably enough because they are all largely the same, but they're great fun.
Yeah.
And I used to like Sean Hudson stuff because I was a big metalhead back in the day, and he used to be best mates with Tommy Vance, who did the Friday Rock Show on Radio 1.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of sort of heavy metal imagery and stuff in Sean Hudson's books.
Yes.
Tremendous fun. Very much of their time. So yeah, I kind of cut my teeth on that sort of stuff. But I was always into seedy crime as well. So I don't know if you remember, there used to be a TV show called Callan with Edward Woodward.
Yes, I've seen it,
Late 60s, 70s, before he did The Equalizer. There's a lot of Callan influences in my books. It was one of those things I just thought it was so absolutely perfect. Because he wasn't James Bond, you know, he wasn't a millionaire playboy. He was this grotty little man from the East, whose job was to shoot people for the government unofficially. And I just thought he was so cool. There is a fair bit of Callan in Don Drake, it must be said.
Well, there's something else I really like about, you know, we'll get one of the things I was going to go on to later on, but the comparisons between, like, Don Drake and other sort of, like, you know, of that ilk. And I think, like, you know, John Constantine or the Dresden Files, those sorts of things. Whenever they get the American influence, they can't help but be the hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's all, you know, they say, oh no, they're an anti-hero, and you're like, oh no, they're not really. And I'm not going to spoil anything because I'm about 2/3 of the way through Dominion at the moment. But I'm learning that Drake has got, you know, he's not shy, let's say, about being the villain at times.
Absolutely. I mean, Don Drake is at heart a very selfish man. He's not a villain, but he's, as he'll be the first one to tell you, he's no one's idea of a white knight either.
No, yeah, and I really like that. Whenever the British side of things, there's a much deeper cynicism, which I always find more honest.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a kind of cultural difference in a way between the British outlook and the American outlook, I think. As you say, even Harry Dresden, for all his many and varied faults, always saves the day, doesn't he?
Yeah.
John Constantine, I mean, I absolutely adore Hellblazer. Lived on that in the 90s. Constantine doesn't, and, you know, sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses, and most of the time his best friends end up dead in the gutter while he saunters off having a smoke.
Yeah.
So, oh well, you know, move on.
That's it, you live and learn kind of thing. And
exactly. It feels more like a lived experience to me, that sort of thing, rather than the white hat hero.
Yeah.
The day.
Yeah, and that's what I find that more interesting. So, I mean, Drake's that's the Drake influence. What else is so Drake came to you? Where did that influence come from, or that inspiration?
Where did it? Oh, it's a weird story actually. I'm on a forum called Absolute Right, which is one of the most useful internet resources for writers of any genre, to be honest. But there was a general sort of throwaway chat thread on there in, it must have been late 2014, I think, where we were just playing a game. Write the best first line you can of a book you haven't written. And I came up with what is still the opening line of Drake. And I thought, lots of people said it was great, and I thought, you know what, I really like that. That needs a story. And I wrote a short story off the back of it that got published in a small anthology. And again, I read that and I thought, yeah, I like that. I really like the characters. I had Wormwood in it and I had Drake in it. But it was before Trixie arrived. And I thought, well, there's so much more to do with this character that I can turn this into a book. And I did. And that's where it came from. It really was as organic as that. And 6 months later, I had a novel, and I thought, okay, Angry Robot, I've got an open door coming up. I'll throw it at him and see if it sticks. And it did.
So it was very fortuitous then, and it sort of, the inspiration came at the right time, and then the open door came as well.
Absolutely. A lot of getting published is, I hesitate to say luck. I mean, you have to have written a good book.
Yeah.
But assuming everybody else who's seriously trying to get published has also written a good book, there's a lot of things that have to align at the right time that you can't necessarily influence. It's getting in front of the right editor on the right day when he happens to be looking for that sort of thing and hasn't just signed something else similar. And
yeah,
there's 101 alignments in the stars that have to line up to make it happen. It's a very unpredictable business, to be honest.
But there are stalwarts, and that's the thing. There are things that are always, like you say, it's an unpredictable business, and whether it be these, in my opinion, awful, like the romance horror books or teen romance kind of things, and they're very sort of, hopefully their time is gone, and then you get other types of books that come and go. But this kind of sort of like urban, what I would say is urban fantasy horror, has stuck around for quite a while. It's always been it's got a good fan base. Yeah, no, it has. It's one of those enduring things. I don't know if it's because it's never been overly saturated. Like, everybody got a bit sick of vampires after the Twilight craze. Yeah.
Or just now beginning to be acceptable again. But you've always had sort of stuff on TV from, I'm trying to think of a really early example, but I mean, you look at something like Buffy. I mean, although it was light-hearted, that effectively was urban fantasy.
Yeah.
They span Angel off of that, which was a bit more darker and grown up, and then you got Supernatural, and then you got True Blood, which is full-on blood and guts and shagging kind of stuff. And it's always there in different iterations, but you don't tend to get this single thing that deluges the market until everybody's sick of the sight of it, like you do with some other things.
But I think part of it is because there's, like you said, there's so many iterations of it. There's so many variances, and it's all because, to me, like all of these is all about, there's the mundane, the mundanity of regular life. There's the regular 9 to 5, and then there's these people like Don Drake or like you said, Buffy or whoever, and you just scratch below the surface, and all of a sudden there's demons and monsters and all kinds of weird shit going on.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of the appeal, and I think you've hit on it there with the mundanity. It's relatable.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us have lived somewhere where there's that one weird house in the neighbourhood. The curtains are always shut, or the car never moves, or whatever. The one thing where you think, there's something not quite right about that guy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to start thinking of things that it might be. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's part of it. If you just extrapolate, just exaggerate that little bit, and suddenly you can find yourself with some guy who's got a chained demon living in his basement.
Yeah. And that's it. I think that's it. It's a simple starting point, and you can let your imagination go like crazy, and who knows? Like you say, who knows behind what goes on behind closed doors?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a big part of it.
I mean, for me, the one my entry point to a lot of this actually was Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere.
Oh, that really is good, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic book, and I mean, the TV series is dated.
Yeah, it kind of looks like old Doctor Who, doesn't it? But
yeah.
The book is fantastic. Absolutely.
But the book's amazing. It's one of those ones I go back to. But I love that idea that just beneath the surface is something, anything, and it opens the door up to so many different things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I quite agree. Yeah, London Below was a wonderful creation, and it's just that little fall through the cracks away, and who knows where you'd find yourself. Very, very well done.
so for Drake, then, you're 3 books in. It's Drake, Dominion, and what's the third one?
Damnation is the third one, which has just come out.
Which came out in May. So really, I mean, what could be the future then for Drake?
Well, I'm certainly planning at least 1, if not 2 more Drake books.
Yeah.
Don't have anything official to announce on that yet, but they are in the works. If you get as far as finishing Damnation, you'll find out why we need to have another Drake book.
I will be there. You about that? I've got to go back and get Drake, but I will get there.
I would hate anybody to think Damnation's going to be the last one, because it isn't. Before we do anything with that, I'm actually working on a new series at the moment with Acebox, who are an imprint of Penguin Random House.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a new series that we recently signed with them, and I've got a book called Priest of Bones, which is coming out in October 2018. A little bit of a departure. It's more swords and horses kind of fantasy. But again, it's a mashup. It's a crime thriller set in a sort of analogue of Tudor Scotland come Northern England.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it's gangsters with swords.
Excellent.
Yeah, we pitched it to the editor as Peaky Blinders with swords meets The Godfather, and that was sold. So that's the next thing. There's 2 books of that sold, so I'm working on those at the moment, but there will definitely be more Drake.
Well, you've definitely sold me on that pitch. So what's on your so that's your reading output. So what's on your regular reading pile at the moment? Is there any current things that you think tickle your fancy?
The most recent thing I read actually was an advanced copy of a book called Blackwing by a guy called Ed MacDonald that's out in the UK in July from Glance. It is fantastic. Absolutely, can't recommend that one enough. It's swords and horses fantasy, but it's set in a magical post-apocalyptic world where he has created some of the nastiest monsters I've read for a long, long time. I'd hate to spoil them because it's one of those things you kind of have to read it in the context of the setting, but these things really are the stuff of nightmares. So that's phenomenal.
What's that called? Blackwing?
Blackwing, yeah.
That's
out of Mace in the US and Glance in the UK.
So I'm scribbling a lot of these down just for reference.
Sure. The last thing I read before that was another advanced copy. One of the great things about being a published author, you get sent books before they're out. A book called Godblind by a lady called Anna Stevens, which is out in 2 weeks' time from Harper Voyager. And that's one of the grimmest, darkest grimdarks I think I've ever read. There is a torture/execution scene in there that I guarantee, mate, you will have your legs crossed for the rest of the day after it.
Do you know what? It sounds like a perfect summer read.
Absolutely, always cheerful stuff. They're both absolutely excellent. They really are.
I'll keep an eye out for those. The first one sounds fascinating.
Yeah. Oh no, I think you'll like Blackwing. That's very, very good.
So going back to sort of your what you wrote between, let's say, 15 and now, the fantasy horror and that sort of thing. Is there anything back there, that sat in a drawer or in a dusty cupboard somewhere you think you would go back and revisit?
Oh no, that's a different question. There is a completed trilogy of other urban fantasy books sitting in a dusty corner of my hard drive. Whether I'd revise it, I don't. It's not impossible, but to be honest, to turn that into something saleable now is probably more work than writing something from scratch.
Yeah.
Because if you think about an apprentice, chaps learning carpentry for argument's sake, the stuff you make as an apprentice, you're gonna throw away, aren't you?
It's true.
Because you're learning. There is a saying that I don't completely agree with. It's one that's trotted out quite frequently. Is that you have to write 1 million words before you sell one. Now, I wouldn't say it was that high a number, but it is quite a large number. I mean, there are very few authors They do exist, but there are very few authors who published the first book they've written.
Yeah.
I mean, you can slap it on Amazon, but, you know. In terms of selling it to a trade publisher, it's very, very unusual for a debut to sell. Most authors have got several unpublished books in their bottom drawer that are never really likely to see the light of day.
Well, like you say, it's that thing of, like you say, it's paying your dues, isn't it?
It is.
Learning your craft.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, yeah, you can go to creative writing classes, you can do a MFA in creative writing, whatever, but you've still got to do the writing. You can't learn to write just from being told how to write. You have to actually sit and write. And the output isn't necessarily going to be great, to be perfectly honest. That first joiner's cupboard isn't necessarily going to be very well made or very square, but you've learned stuff from building it, and it's exactly the same thing.
So I suppose what you're saying there, though, as well, is that you've got to have a level of honesty with yourself as well.
I think you really have. I mean, it's one of those. It's a very unusual business model in that you have to have absolute belief in yourself and your product, but you also have to have absolute honesty with yourself, as you say, and know when it isn't good enough.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to judge when your own work is good enough, but you should be able to tell when it isn't.
Mm.
That's not necessarily an easy thing, and of course, a lot of people go the other way and don't have the belief in themselves to know when it is good.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, I'll get onto a question about it in a minute, but you saying that there are very popular, famous authors that, you know, their first sort of like third of their books are very, very good, very lean, and very sort of like, you know, honest. And then sometimes they seem to turn a corner, and you think, oh, you needed a stronger editor on this.
Mm.
And it's
a good editor is the most valuable thing any author can have, honestly. I mean, even if you're self-publishing, for God's sake, hire an editor. Self-editing is borderline impossible, to be honest. It's one of those things you can do to an extent. You can read it, you can catch typos, you can move commas around. But the sort of stuff that a structural or developmental editor does, that tells you, you know, you should have introduced this character 5 chapters ago, it's soggy in the middle, you end it in the wrong place, or you started in the wrong place, or the pacing is off.
Yeah.
It's so hard to the point of being impossible to judge that on your own work that you've been head down staring at for 6 months, because you get to the point where you're just too close to it.
Well, that's the question then, mate.
About the really famous authors, I think there does come a point where somebody is so hugely famous that the editors will let them pretty much put out whatever they send in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, obviously I'm not in that sort of position, but I agree. I mean, there are authors who have been going for 20, 30 years, and you think, it's not as good as your old stuff.
Yeah.
Which is always rather sad, but...
Which when you see when I see the book width, I'll be honest, but when you see the book, like, you know, the depth of that book, you get thicker and thicker, and you start to think, you've just had a whole heap of ideas and you're not willing to give any of them up.
Maybe that's what it is. I don't really know.
But that's the question for me. Have you had to sacrifice any darlings? Has there been any pieces you've got and you thought, that's amazing, but you've had to roll back?
No, because I'm the exact opposite. I never write enough.
Okay.
I have never written a book that didn't get longer while it was being edited.
Right.
So most writers will get told off by their editors because it's too fat and get sent away to cut 30,000 words out of it.
Yeah.
Damnation, I think my editor, Phil at Angry Robot, made me add probably the best part of 10,000 words, I think, before that came out. I've always underwritten. I write very, very sparsely. And when I'm doing my own revisions, I'm putting stuff in rather than taking it out. And, it's been the same with Ace, with Priest of Bones. I've just turned around the structural edits on that. And again, I'm adding stuff, not taking it out. But that's me. It's part of my process. It's not necessarily anybody else's.
Well, that's actually another question. So what is your... So you sit down in front of your keyboard. What's your process? How does Peter McLean put sort of words to page?
Oh, dear me. That's an interesting question and a varied one. And this is where I'm probably going to contradict every writing rule in the How to Write Books book. I write when I want to. I'm not one of these thou shalt write X number of words a day people. I'll go days without writing at all, but I will still be thinking about it. And if I have an idea, I'll make some notes, whatever. But I won't necessarily sit and hack words into the keyboard. When I do, I'll do great binges of. I think my last writing binge was best part of 7,000 words in an evening, and then I will revise what I wrote yesterday the next day. So another of the great rules is don't edit as you go along. I completely disagree with that and do the exact opposite. The upshot of that for me is that by the time I finish the first draft, it's fairly readable and everything's in the right order. And I haven't got characters appearing and disappearing and people I've forgotten were dead and all this sort of thing that you hear other people having to fix in revisions.
Yes.
But obviously it probably does make writing the first draft slower, but it's what works for me. I've always said the only right way to write a book is the way that works for you. And I think it's part of that apprenticeship, part of paying your dues, is to figure out the way that works for you. Because Stephen King wrote a fantastic book called On Writing, which is very, very, very good. And it outlines Stephen King's method of writing for Stephen King. And obviously it works for him. He's phenomenally successful and a fantastic writer. But it wouldn't work for me if I tried to write the way he writes. I'd end up with an incoherent mess because he doesn't believe in outlining, he doesn't believe in planning, and I have to write from an outline. So it's a difficult question to answer about the right way to do it. But I mean, in terms of what I'll do, if I'm starting something brand new, I'll come up with a character. Always start with a character, then I'll stick that person in a setting, and then I'll give them a problem. And by that time, I've figured the character out well enough to get an idea of how they'd go about solving that first problem. And I'll start writing from there. At which point, I will establish how the book is going to end and how I want that character's resolution to look. Mm-hmm. Then it's a matter of figuring out how you get from point A to point B. And I'll do that in a sort of bulleted outline. Goes from one point to the other. Flesh that out as I go, and as I'm writing it and new things occur. I mean, the outline will flex and evolve in progress, but once I've got the start, I don't think I've ever changed one. And the ending is where we're going. Once I've decided how it ends, that's where we're going. And yeah, the journey will evolve as you write and get to know the characters better and have new ideas, but you'll still end up at the planned point. And once I'll just sit and write it from that point, right?
No, it's good. I mean, that's it. I mean, I find it really interesting because it does work differently for different people, because it's about how your brain works, how your mind works, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And it is fascinating to find out, how different artists basically sculpt something. In your case, you produce the story and characters and a world. It's all at your head, and I always find it interesting to find out how people do, how it gets from being in your brain to being on the page. It's funny you say about sort of Stephen King's On Writing, because I've had friends in the past that have read that and have tried to be writers, and they do that thing of, well, no, Stephen King said to do this and Stephen King said to that, and you're sort of like, well, even I'm like, well, I don't think I work that way in my own head. So
no, I mean that book's a memoir. It's not a textbook. It's a memoir Stephen King writes. And it is a fascinating book. It's well worth reading for any aspiring writer, but don't take it as how you should write.
Yeah. Do your own thing.
Yeah, maybe it won't. Try it, but there is never a one true way to do anything.
No. So, really, I mean, we've talked about... I'm just going to go off-piste a little bit then, really. So we've talked about literature a lot about, but what other things in the sort of horror fantasy genre do you sort of... do you enjoy?
I tend to like the old classic films. I mean, in terms of sort of horror mashed with other things, I think one of my big favourites is Alien.
Yes.
Alien and Aliens, which is slightly different. I mean, Alien itself is just a haunted house film. It just happens to be on a spaceship, and it happens to be a Nashi Geiger alien and not a ghost, but it's still a haunted house movie at its heart. That's absolutely phenomenal. And I like things, I mean, you can tell from my own writing, I like things that are more than one genre or two things mashed together. I mean, he looked completely the other end of the spectrum, but I think he came out at about the same time. If you remember Lost Boys.
Yes.
With Kiefer Sutherland.
Kiefer Sutherland, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's some of it. The vampire stuff is quite vampire-y in an 80s sort of way, but it's a comedy. It's a kids' comedy.
Yeah, it is a real coming of age kind of story. So
Absolutely. And we are near Dark, which is one of my favourite films. Those vampires again, but they're a very different, seedy, grubby kind of vampire in a southern gothic, almost a sort of spaghetti western kind of setting. And
yes,
I love that sort of thing where it's one thing crossed with another. You know, Dog Soldiers is.
Oh, I love Dog
a
Soldiers.
movie, and then you throw werewolves at it because why the hell not? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that sort of thing more than just retellings of Dracula or the Mummy or whatever. You think, oh, yeah, okay, we know how this ends.
Well, again, I think it sort of tickles it tickles something in us of, that comes almost from childhood. It's almost like, well, so and so versus so and so, who would win? And you just mash those things up. I do like those sort of mashups, and
I did endure Freddy versus Jason to answer that question, and I was an hour and a half of my life I won't get back. But yeah. I think actually that's an interesting thing. I don't know if you'd agree, but something I was talking to somebody about this a few months ago. The franchise monster movies, like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and that kind of thing. The first ones, it's the villain killing the hero's mates, and there comes a point around movie 3 or 4 where you're rooting for Freddy and Jason, aren't you? Because it's their franchise and they're the iconic thing. And by about movie 7, it's become a pastiche of itself.
Oh, well.
The Freddy show. And it's like, it interests me at what point you go from being scared of Freddy to rooting for Freddy to laughing at Freddy.
Do you know what? Right, it's so funny you say this, because I've had this conversation several times with friends of mine, and we not too long ago, I actually did a show focusing on Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. And
yes, I think that was probably the point in that one, wasn't it?
There is. It's that point. There's a scene in that where it's the first time he quips, when he says, "Welcome to prime time, bitch," and he just takes a turn from being the villain to being almost like you said, the franchise hero. Yeah. I don't know, but yeah.
It's like the Chucky movies, isn't it? I mean, you can buy Chucky dolls. He's like a mascot kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it's bizarre. I think it's because, really, I think from a production point of view and from a movie sort of studio point of view, the only consistent thing really is the villain.
It is. Well, yeah, because everybody else is in body bags, aren't they?
Yeah.
The one you can rely on coming back next time is the monster.
Yeah. Well, so I suppose they sort of, it's by default, really.
Yeah, but it didn't work with Halloween, did it?
No, that's one of the most...
I don't know what your view is, but I thought that got bad.
Yes.
Whereas but Freddy and Jason just get funnier and funnier.
Yeah.
But the Mike Myers series got so bad. I think I watched about half of H2O and I was just like, no.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. I think it's a great thing. Like this, the Carpenter original is amazing, and 2 I like, and then 3 with the masks is a departure, and then it just goes off the rails. They bring Michael back, and it goes, yeah, it's got voodoo priest druids in it, and all weird stuff. Yeah, it goes bad series.
Certainly does.
We're talking about mashups. I mean, you say about horror comedies. I mean, these things do, like you say, become a pastiche, and it will eventually take the mickey out of themselves.
Yeah.
I always think that the best one for that though is Jason X, when they actually send Jason Voorhees into the future in space.
Was that the spaceship one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yes, that is. Well, I hope it was meant to be funny. I was never entirely sure.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Assuming it was meant to be funny, it's a work of genius.
I hope so, because that's what I always take it as. Like.
Yeah.
But yeah. That's someone going very meta and going, well, we'll take him to space.
Absolutely. Everything's better in space, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a remake. Yeah.
There are certain things that don't seem to... I've never seen a mashup, or I've never seen a good mashup, though. And I wonder why is... Because you say, you've seen... there's Jason Voorhees in space, there's a Leprechaun in space film, there's all these other things. We don't see many... There's very little horror based around sort of like Victorian or like the Wild West. And I've always wondered why, really.
There's not a lot, is there? There is a fairly small fantasy subgenre called Weird West, where people tend to write. It's the same sort of thing you get in urban fantasy, but put in a Western setting. So it's not horror as such, but you maybe get Wild West vampires or Wild West wizards kind of thing. But there's not a lot of it about that I'm aware of. I'm sure we'll get hundreds of recommendations in the comments on this podcast of things we should have happened, but that's all good.
It's to say if they're out there.
Yeah, I'm sure they do exist, but no, I can't. Actually, I tell a lie. There's one I read not very long ago by a chap called Eric Scott Fischel, and it's called Dr. Potter's Medicine Show. And that's really, really cool. It's about a sort of travelling, well, it's a medicine show, so a sort of travelling carnival come comic. I think it's set in about 1880, 1890, not that long after the end of the Civil War. And again, I don't want to give too many spoilers away because you really want to read that. But it involves the freak show element of the medicine show. Ooh. But there's a lot more to it than that. And it's about where the freaks are coming from. That's got a lot of horror influences in it. A lot of historical alchemy woven into it as well. That's well worth a read.
So what's that called again?
Dr. Potter's Medicine Show.
Dr. Potter's Medicine Show. See, this is what it's all about. Finding out new things. Finding new things.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, before we sort of start to wrap up then, because we've been on for almost 40 minutes, do you want to promote the books, where people can find you, where they can find the books, where they can find things for the future?
I mean, sure. So, I'm trade published. I'm in bookstores. It's a bit hit and miss whether you'll find them in Waterstones or not, depending on the size of the branch, but they do stock them. Obviously on Amazon, Barnes & Noble in the States, Chapters Indigo in Canada, whatever the chain store is in Australia, I can't remember. But yeah, so they're stocked worldwide.
In all good bookstores?
Absolutely, and on Amazon, of course, if you must. The series is called the Burned Man series. The first book is Drake, the second Dominion, the third Damnation. And the Gangsters with Swords book that's coming out October 2018 will be Priest of Bones. You can find it all on my website at talonwraith.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter at PeteMC666.
And I'll make sure that all those details are in the show notes so people can find those things. And I'll say I'm really enjoying Dominion. It's excellent. Thoroughly really enjoying it. I will be getting the other books.
Good man.
And thank you very, very much for taking the time.
No, you're very welcome. It's been lovely to speak to you. Thank you for having me.
That's okay. And like I say, so we have a copy of Drake, the first book in the series, the Burned Man series, signed copy to give away. So I will come up with a question, which will probably be after this in the podcast. But a signed edition of the first book in the series. So it's very exciting. So thank you, Peter. It's been fantastic.
Right. Thanks a lot, Scott. Cheers.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Cheers, mate. Bye. Okay, so there we have it. The interview with Pete McLean. I really enjoyed talking to him, actually. It's really good fun. Some really interesting points about everything. How he got right into writing, his writing style, Drake, slasher films, historical horror. All good. So look out for his work. It's really, really good. He can be found on Twitter, as he said. Just Google him. Google the books. Try the books. Find them on Amazon. If you've got a Kindle, find them on Kindle. I'm sure they're available. So, the big thing. The giveaway. So, Pete has given me a copy of Drake, the first book in the Drake series, a signed copy of Drake, to give away to one lucky listener. So what question? Well, I thought about different things, but there was something that sort of struck me when we recorded the first of this, and it was that idea of horror in the urban setting or the suburban setting, and I sort of circled Buffy. So thinking about it, really, I thought, well, we did with Dave Moody last time. We did a Lovecraftian question. It was all about Mr. Lovecraft. This time then, let's do Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What year, okay, so in what year did the TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer start? Okay, so that's in what year did the TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer start? Okay, so if you want to contact me about that, give me the answer, or anything to do with horror or any of the pop culture things. We've got some great things coming up in the August summer holidays. It's the summer holidays, and it's going to be fantastic. We're doing something a bit special, one a week. I've got some great ones lined up. Just recorded one the other day with a guy called Ori Enev, the big boss at Dragon Fruit, the dating app by Geeks for Geeks, and it's cracking. It's a really good chat. I mean, we got into some proper stuff. We look at, and this can be the next show out, we look at and discuss, when did the 20th century end? Both, obviously it ended on midnight 1999, but when did it end pop culture wise? So it's a really good conversation. It really goes around the houses. It's fantastic, and it gets quite deep, quite political. I'm sure you will enjoy it. So get in contact with me on Twitter if you've got any questions or comments or feedback, or even the answer to the question, at 20th Century Geek on Twitter, or 20th Century Geek at gmail.com, or even on the Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Tumblr, all those kinds of things. And don't forget Britpod Scene. Also remember to Google that. Try out some of the other podcasts on there. Might try if we can get some of the guests on from that. Okay. Well, it's been a cracking one. And next time we're going to get into the summer holidays. All the good funs. Okay. See you guys later. Thanks for listening.